This morning, and technically we're supposed to pick up along about verse 12, but last week, one of the things that we talked about, and I read it out of Brother Gaddis Roy's book, Types and Shadows, and we've run into a lot of types and shadows so far in the study of Genesis, and Joseph is another one. And we kind of read through that, and I promised there would be a handout, so if you want to go back and study it, you can, but I thought we'd kind of go back through it since we have it in front of us and use that for kind of a brief review of Joseph, which is going to be a very interesting story. We see the providence of God working in the life of Joseph. And what's so fascinating about this, you have to remember, Joseph's 17 years old when these events start to take place in his life. So he was about 17 years old when he was sold into Egyptian bondage. So and it speaks a lot for his convictions that he had, because we know that while he was down there, he could have went in another direction, couldn't he? But he stayed faithful and true unto God, and the blessing on the other side of that was he became the prime minister of Egypt. And that's the providence of God at work itself, because we find that his father and his brethren years later would have to come down because of famine to seek food. And this is how the children of Israel wound up in Egypt, and eventually they would wind up in Egyptian bondage. But anyway, it's a very fascinating story. It's really a very powerful story to us as adults, and even to young people, that a young person can stand and serve God. And we find that in the life of Daniel. We find that in the life of Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, and those others that we talked about in the Bible. And so we find that we can learn a powerful lot from the life of Joseph. If you'll excuse me for just a minute, Brother Colin, there's a handout. And so we find, as we look at this morning, as I said, we'll kind of go back through it, that Joseph is a type of Christ. It is a picture, it is a shadow of good things to come. Last week we talked about 14 of these things and shadows that Brother Roy had listed in his book, and I kind of lost count, but between Brother Con and Jeremy and Jeff and all of it, I think we were kind of up to 18 shadows and types, and we're only through verse 12. So we find there's a whole lot to be gained from this. As we've said before, I'm sure if we was to go back, as with any other book in the Bible, and start the study of Genesis over again, we're probably going to find we even missed a lot, you know? And we call ourselves hitting a lot, okay? There's a lot in this. But anyway, we find that Joseph, a picture of Christ on the handout, that one of the things that's noticed is that divine providence overruled the envy of his brothers. Another way of saying that is they meant evil unto Joseph, but God meant it for good. And so we see the providence of God working in the life of Joseph. Divine providence overruled the wickedness of the Jews. So here again, we see the Jews meant the persecution and killing of Jesus for evil, but God meant it for good. So you can see a sharp contrast between the attitudes of the world and the attitude of God. We also found Joseph was Jacob's beloved son. And of course we know, and we talked last week about the coat of many colors, and that brought about conflict in the family because Jacob had set Joseph up as a little more preferred over the other children, and we talked about that can create family problems, sibling rivalry, and things of that nature. Just as Joseph was Jacob's beloved son, Jesus was God's only begotten son. And so we see that Jesus was sent down to heaven to reconcile man back unto God. Joseph was sent on a mission of mercy. He was sent down there by his fathers to check on his brethren to see if they were all right. And when you look at this kind of in detail, and we'll talk more about it as we get into the main body of the lesson this morning, you're going to find that was kind of a dangerous situation he was going into because we've already studied, and in verse 4, we find because of the events that were already transpiring and from the coat of many colors, his brethren, verse 4, could not speak peaceably unto him. So a lot of animosity is already starting to build. And then we talked about the dreams he was having about how his brethren would serve him. That didn't go over good. So we find a lot of animosity is building in the family, a lot of conflict within the children and within the family itself. So we find that Joseph was sent on this mission of mercy, and he went. And we find that Jesus was sent on a mission of mercy which dealt with salvation. And so we find that these things are in parallel with each other. We also find here that we talked about last week that Joseph was rejected by his brothers because of envy. He was rejected by his brethren because of envy. We talked about envy being a very powerful tool of the devil, and a lot of times envy will bring about hardness of the heart. That people will do things out of envy and malice that they wouldn't normally do. Jesus was rejected by his own people because of envy, and I put in parenthesis there, unbelief. Pilate knew because of envy they had delivered him, so there's a parallel there. Joseph was hated because of his dreams of exaltation, and what that means there is, when you go back there and read about the sheaves and the cows and things of that nature, bowing down and things of that nature, Joseph was telling them one day, I'm going to be exalted above you. In a way, I guess you could say, he was telling them, hey, one day I'm going to be your king. And you can imagine how that went over, okay? But in reality, he would be, wouldn't he? He rose to be the second highest power in Egypt, and that was prime minister under Pharaoh. So you don't get much higher than that without being Pharaoh itself. And so we find the same thing with Jesus. Jesus was hated because he claimed to be king, and he was king. And we talked about that in great detail of the lessons about how he did not come to be a physical king, but a spiritual king. And yet because they could not see the picture of the spirituality, he was hated by his people, just as Joseph was hated by his people. Joseph was stripped of his coat of many colors. And we're going to see also when we come over that Jesus also was stripped of his garments. Jesus was stripped of his garments. Joseph was sold for 20 pieces of silver, we're going to find in this study. Genesis chapter 37, 23 through 28. Jesus was sold for 30 pieces of silver. So worldly goods or money was involved in both transactions of Joseph and Jesus. And both thought they had done the same thing. Both had thought, hey, wait a minute, we've gotten rid of him. We've got a little worldly gain, but yet we got rid of him. That was the most important thing that was going on. And here again, like I say, Joseph's brothers thought they had got rid of him. Jesus' enemies thought they had gotten rid of him. Later, Joseph's brethren had to face him. Type of judgment. That which was rejected had to be faced in the end. We find that Jesus' enemies had to face him at the resurrection, didn't they? And yet we know in the latter end of all that his enemies are going to face him in judgment. His enemies are going to face him in judgment. And we're going to find too, as I turn over to the next page, Joseph's brethren lied about what happened to him. They lied to their father about what happened to him. When they went back to the father and the father wanted to know about Joseph, they lied to him. Well, that's the same thing Jesus' enemies did. They lied about what happened, didn't they? You go tell them that his body was taken away by the disciples and he gave them money. Involves the same thing, doesn't it? Joseph was tempted and remained pure. Jesus was tempted and said not. And it's just plumb fascinating when you go there and study it, and I'll just fast forward a little bit about Joseph being in the Potiphar's household, and his wife came to him, and you got this woman throwing herself at you, and Joseph ran. He literally ran. It makes you think about what Paul said to the church at Corinth about fornication. Daniel is 2 words: flee fornication. So when I put the Old Testament together and I put what's said in the New Testament together, Brother Jackson, picture I did, if you have to, run. Yeah? Get away from it. And of course we found that he was going to be thrown in prison because of that. Joseph became ruler and invited his starving brethren. Just as Jesus became ruler and invites all those today that are in spiritual starvation. Joseph forgave his brethren. It's kind of like Jesus here. Jesus could have called down legions of angels and stopped the whole thing, couldn't he? Joseph had in his power as prime minister, all he had to do was look over to his right and tell the captain of the guard that's surrounding his throne, go cut the heads off. That would have been the end of it, wouldn't it? He had it in his power to do that. Jesus had it in his power to stop the events that transpired and that led up to his crucifixion. But Jesus, like Joseph, forgave. And Jesus pardoned sinners like Joseph pardoned his brethren. Also we find that Joseph gave his people Goshen, and when you go there and read about Goshen and in this event where all that transpires, it was the best of the land. Jesus has come today to give us the best of the land. Not the physical land, but the promised land, a far greater land. And so we find those types and shadows contained within this. And last week, as we was going through the Bible study, we added 3 or 4 more to it. Okay? So there's more here than what a lot of times that we see and that we talk about. So I thought that was real interesting about the types and shadows of Joseph. Any of you brethren have anything you want to comment on that before we pick up on verse 12? Okay, as we said, Joseph was 17 years old, and in verse 2, these are the generations of Jacob, Joseph being 17 years old. So Joseph was given some responsibility, wasn't he? It goes to show you that parents are responsible to rear up their children with a sense of responsibility. And you're going to find where there's no sense of responsibility, there's a breakdown in the communication of the home, isn't it? And there's a breakdown in society because of that. But Joseph, it says here, was feeding the flock with his brethren. So Joseph was a young man that had some duties and responsibilities he knew how to work. Although you kind of sense that as Jacob was getting older, and the way he looked at Joseph, he may have backed off from that sense of responsibility a little bit, because while the other brothers were off feeding the flock, Joseph was still at home. But we're going to notice a statement that Joseph makes in being obedient to his father. And that statement we're going to find is going to be in verse 13. And it's a statement that's used numerous times in the Bible, and we have 2 more other cases that's most noted. And so we find in verse 12, as we said, where we're going to pick up, and his brethren went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. So they were in Shechem, they were feeding the flock, and Israel, or Jacob, said unto Joseph, Do not thy brethren feed the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send thee unto them. And so we find, he tells Joseph, I'm going to send you down there. You need to go check on your brethren, make sure everything's all right, see what may be needed, what may not be needed. Now, Joseph could have said, hey, wait a minute, Daddy. My brethren hate me. They speak ill of me. And I'm afraid to go down there. He could have said that. But notice what he said instead. I will send thee unto them, and he said to him, Here am I. Here am I. You know, the father said, go, and what did Joseph say? Here am I. Turn over to Isaiah chapter 6 and verse 8, and I think we probably use this more in lessons and things than we use any other time. It's what Isaiah said here. Verse 8. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying, whom shall I send, and who will go for us? Then I said, here am I. Here am I. The Father said, what? Who shall I send? Isaiah said, here am I. Very similar to the statement that Joseph had made some probably, 600 years, 1,300 years later, or something like that. I don't do the math very good in my head anymore. So anyway, we have that statement made. We find it again in Genesis chapter 22 and verse 1. Notice what is said here about Abraham. Genesis 22 and verse 1. And it came to pass after these things that God did tempt Abram and said unto him, Abram, and he said, what did Abraham say? Here am I. Here am I. When God called, Abraham responded. Kind of different from the way Adam responded, wasn't it, in the garden. He went and hid himself. You know? He went and hid, didn't he? Yeah. Here am I. Yeah. Here am I. So, very powerful statement that you're going to, and that's not the only time that is used here in the Bible. I did not do a count on it, but if you'll pull it up on the website, pull it up on the internet and just type in the search, here am I, it just comes up. And there's many, many passages in the Bible where here am I is used in some contextual form or another. So, very popular statement to respond when the Father stated, here am I. And he said to him, go, I pray thee, see whether it be well with thy brethren, and well with the flock, and bring me well again. So he went out of the vale of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And we kind of covered that. He was going down there to check on the flock, make sure everything is okay. And you're to bring word back to me at the status of the flock and of your brethren. And notice what it says here. And so he sent out and he left Shechem, and a certain man, now this is interesting right here. Now here he's out going to Shechem to see if he can find his brethren, and a certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field, and the man saying, what seekest thou? You know, it's kind of interesting. He goes down to Shechem. He's out wandering in the field. Well, we're going to find out that the reason that he's out wandering in the field like that is because his brethren aren't where they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be at Shechem, but they're not. So we find that Joseph could have done what? He could have turned around and went back home, couldn't he? So it poses a question, and it's really written very generically here. But notice how it's phrased. And a certain man found him. Always seeing the providence of God at work directing Joseph to go to his brothers like his father had told him to. Did we see the providence of God playing this out to where Joseph is to go to Dothan and the other events that's going to transpire? So you know, begs you to ask the question, and it would be only maybe speculative on our part, but who is this certain man? Well, it makes you have to think that this certain man was probably an angel, wasn't it? Of course, we know that God uses angels in human form, you know. So you have to stop and think about that here would almost have been a stopping point. This would almost have been a period. Well, Joseph went down there. Don't see him anywhere. So I'll go back home and tell Daddy, I don't know where he went. But that's not what happened, is it? You see, God wanted Joseph down there with his brethren, didn't he? Now, it really doesn't tell us why they went to Dothan. There's some thoughts on it. Better water, better grazing. One of the more stronger thoughts on it is that they knew that Joseph would be coming to seek for them. And Dothan would have been a better place for them to connive and do what they had to do. So there is some thoughts on that. The Bible doesn't really say, but we know they wasn't where they were supposed to be. And so we find the man told him in verse 16, Joseph said, in verse 16, I say, my brother, tell me, I pray thee, where they feed their flocks. He said, I'm looking for my brethren. They're not here. Where are they? And the man said, they are departed hence, for I heard them say, let us go to Dothan. And Joseph went after his brethren and found them in Dothan. So Joseph didn't give up, did he? When he was given further instruction on what to do, what did he do? He went on. And that's where he found them, didn't he? In Dothan. And you can see, as I say before, in a lot of this, when you look at it and think about it, you can see the strong hand of God working his plan out. You know, man has one idea of what's going on. God has another, you know. And you have to ask yourself this question, and I'll just drop this in here on the modern scale as we look at this. Are we seeing the hand of God being played out today? The world looking at it as evil. God's looking at it for the good of all. So you have to ask yourself that question. What is really going on here? You know, when you look at the way God worked in the lives of these men of the old Bible, you know, what's going on here? So anyway, we find that he went to Dothan, and when he saw them afar off, even before he came near to him, they conspired against to slay him. You know, here's opportunity now. You know, Daddy don't know we up here at Dothan. We supposed to be down at Shechem, some 12 miles south. Nobody knows we're here. And here he comes. Looks like they created this opportunity, really, the way it looks. Well, here he comes. And now they're going to conspire. They're going to plan together. They're going to get together. And what do they want to do? They want to slay him. We're going to kill him. Boy, that's a bad case of envy there when it breeds to that point, isn't it? Well, that's the same thing they did with Jesus. You know, they had a bad case of envy toward Jesus. Come now, therefore, let us slay him, verse 20, cast him into some pit, and we will say some evil beast hath devoured him. Boy, that's bad, isn't it? Let us get together now, these brothers, 11 of them, getting together and saying, let's get him, let's throw him in a pit somewhere, and we'll say that some beast had devoured him. And we shall see what will become of his dreams. That's a lot of sarcasm right there, isn't it? I mean, that's what they were. That's really what was, between the coat and the dreams, that was really a grinding in the craw, wasn't it, so to speak. That was really upsetting to them. They hadn't forgotten it. And so we find that Reuben, of all, heard it and delivered him out of their hands and said, let us not kill him. You know, Reuben had his own set of trouble, didn't he? Is what he had done early on with his father's concubine. And yet we find Reuben, out of all of them, speaking up. He spoke up and said, hey, wait a minute now, this don't seem right. Let's don't kill him now. That's not what we need to do here. And Reuben said unto them, shed no blood, but cast him into this pit that is in the wilderness, and lay no hand upon him, that he might rid him out of their hands to deliver him unto their father again. So Reuben said, hey, wait a minute, don't kill him, just throw him in the pit. Well, what we're going to find is, the reason they was going to cast him in the pit, they was going to let him just starve to death. That's what they were going to do. But notice what we're going to get into here next. And it came to pass, when Joseph was coming to his brethren, that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him in the pit. It was empty, and there was no water in it. Well, you know, the first impression about there being no water in it has to do with the fact that, if they had 30 men with water in it, he would have drowned. But is that really what it's talking about here when you look at the next verse? And they sat down to eat bread. They were going to let them starve to death. You know, you can go without eating for a few days, can't you? But you're not going to go without water very long, are you? You sure aren't. And they sat down to eat bread. Now that's kind of, that is kind of bad. That's kind of hard-hearted, isn't it? You throw your brother in the pit, you're going to let him starve to death, and you're going to sit down and eat. You know, that just shows you a picture of envy right there, doesn't it? If envy is not put in check, it will make you do some very bad things, as it did here. And they lifted up their eyes and looked, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels, bearing spicery and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Well, they looked up, and here comes this Egyptian caravan. Well, that's just Ishmaelites, but they're going down, which is the descendants of Ishmael, and they're going down to Egypt with these costly goods. And we know back then that's how they traveled and conducted business. You could say that these camels and these caravans were what we call modern day trucking. This was how they were trucking, see. They had all these camels loaded up with the merchandise, didn't they? And so we find they saw them, and Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? You know, what's it going to profit us to do that? Really? If we slay him and we kill him, we'll know about it, but what about Daddy back at home? What are we going to tell him when we come back, or if Joseph doesn't show up? There's going to be a lot of questions asked about this situation. So what they decide to do is in verse 27, come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, and his brethren were content. Basically what they're saying here, let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, got to get our hands off the blood. Well, they didn't really, did it? But in their hearts and mind, we'll let somebody else do our evil deed for us. You know? The Ishmaelites are taken, they're taken down into Egypt, probably be sold as a slave, if he even makes it to Egypt. What they were anticipating on, somewhere in all this, he'd wind up dead. But not at their hands. So, you know, that way they wouldn't have to tell Jacob, hey, some wild beast got him. We had nothing to do with it. You know? And what you're going to find is, as these things unfold, this envy led from one lie being covered up by another lie, being covered up by another lie, being covered up by another lie. So when you embark on these things and you start down that road, you can't throw truth in there to prop it up, can you? Now you might sprinkle it with a little bit of truth just to create confusion, but truth can't prop up evil, can it? So once they started down this road, it was kind of like a point of no return. Then there passed by Midianite merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites with 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. And so we find they carried out what they had conspired to do, hoping that this band of Ishmaelites would carry out what they had decided not to do, but wanted to do. And so we find that Reuben, he doesn't tell us where Reuben had went, but Reuben had went off somewhere. Doesn't say, would be very speculative in nature, but we find that Reuben returned into the pit. Reuben returned into the pit. So Reuben had went off somewhere to do something, and behold, Joseph was not in the pit, and he rent his clothes. So Reuben returned, Joseph wasn't in the pit. And he rent his clothes, and that's a sign of saying, he was upset about that thing. And he returned unto his brethren and said, the child is not, and whither shall I go? And they took Joseph's coat, killed a kid, goat, dipped the blood in it, and they sent the coat of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, this have we found. Know now whether or not it be thy son's coat or not. No, they knew it was his coat. So what they did was, they took the coat, They dipped it in goat's blood, and they showed it to the father. And is this his coat? We don't know if that's his coat or not. This is what we found. Now, come on. It was a coat of many colors. It was very distinct. It was very different. You know, now we found this, but we innocent. That's another way of saying that. Jeremy?
But in a way, they never said that he was dead. They
Right.
gave all the circumstantial evidence and statements that pointed to that.
Yeah. But it's strongly implied, isn't it?
Right.
And so that leads to something else here that Jeremy is talking about here. And he knew and said, "It is my son's coat, and an evil beast had devoured him." Joseph, without doubt, ran in pieces. So the way they presented that whole thing was that a wild beast had killed him. As Jeremy said, did they ever say that per se? No, but it's strongly implied, isn't it? And so Joseph, took it for what it was, and they let him believe that a wild beast had killed him and being rent in pieces, and no doubt being torn and tattered. More than likely, it was set up to look like maybe a lion or a leopard had gotten it. If you look at that, when it's being rent and torn, back then, when you're out traveling like they were in that part of the country where there was lions and leopards and things of that nature, no doubt they had seen the effects that a lion or leopard would have upon somebody if it was to attack you. So with that being in place and that other play, what was he to think? And so we find Jacob. He goes in the morning, he puts on sackcloth upon his loins, and he mourned, many days. And all his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him. And that's real interesting, isn't it? Now, they're really playing this thing out to the end, aren't they? The daughters, you can see how would rise up to comfort him. But the sons, what comfort could they really give him? It was all hollow and vain comfort, wasn't it? You stop and you think about this, and a lot of times false religious leaders give folks a false sense of hope and comfort a lot of times about the loved ones, don't they? They have all kinds of stories that they tell about it, but it's a false sense, isn't it? And yet we find that these brothers here now, we're trying to comfort him, but as we say, it's a false sense of comfort. And he says, "For I will go down in the grave until my son mourning." So this cut Jacob pretty hard to the quick, didn't it? And the Midianites sold him into Egypt unto Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh's and captain of the guard. And so we find this is going to be the fate of Joseph being sold. Some thoughts about this Potiphar's guy being the captain of the guard. Some historians tell us that this man more than likely was the captain of the executioners. Now, I'm just going to drop that in there. We do know that he was a powerful man. He was a captain. So he was high-ranking in the Egyptian military. But whether or not he was the captain, the chief executioner of the executioners or not, doesn't really tell us. But he had a lot of power, because when the event transpired in Joseph's life, to where his wife threw herself at him, when Potiphar found out about it, he immediately threw him in prison. So he had some strong ties. Jeremy?
Sometimes I wonder, he threw him in prison because I think Potiphar knew his wife.
Yeah.
Because the penalty of adultery in Egypt is death.
Yep.
So instead of killing him, he removed him from the situation.
Yeah.
Put him in jail where he still, I think, had control or influence.
Yeah. Yeah, and that you see the providence of God working out in this thing still, I mean, the man in authority like this here again, he could have had him killed, couldn't he? I mean, just like that. But yet we find God's hand in this to where he's put in prison. And look at what's going to happen to him as he winds up in prison. He's going to run the place. Now you think about that for a minute, That's a powerful thought in itself, isn't it? Brother Con, you
I'm
can,
just gonna say, I can't hear too good, but the best I can follow, we're talking about the greatness, speaking about the greatness of Joseph.
right,
But I think there's a scripture, I'm pretty sure there is a scripture that says, when he arrived, he's second in command, of course, second only unto Pharaoh.
right,
And when he riding in that chariot, going out among the people, they done had the instruction, every one of them for that knee to bow. They got to bow down unto Joseph. And he's riding down through there in that chariot. It's just something to imagine in your mind, but it is something to think about. It sure is.
yeah, and you know, you have to stop and think about God doing his part, but Joseph had to do his part too, didn't he?
Oh, yeah.
While he was down there, yeah. And, you know, he became, I guess you could say, an honorable man within the prison system and was put in charge of the prison and the keeping of the inmates and stuff like that. And there he was, an inmate himself. And sometimes you hear stories about like, you know, that today about some people get in a bad situation and they go into prison and they get in there and they have such good repute on the other end of the spectrum that they wind up doing a lot of things within there. So, it can happen, but more often than not, it doesn't happen. But we know that God's hand is in this. Yeah, we talked about malice, and I really didn't want to get into chapter 38, so we'll just kind of pause right there. But there's a couple of other thoughts here. You know, malice is a most mischievous thing, and it leads. The danger of it is it can lead to making bloody work. And we can see this, you know, in the life of Joseph. Really, deep down, nothing but his blood would satisfy him, really. You know, Reuben probably made him stop and pause for just a minute, but you can imagine Simeon and Levi, and we'll kind of back up a little bit here. Simeon and Levi had done what? They had went down there and they had utterly killed the king of Shechem and all the men of that city, hadn't they? Well, that may be another reason that Joseph was sent down there to check on them, because, you know, they're still in a hostile environment from what they had done. So with them, nothing less than the blood of Joseph is really what they wanted. You know, it kind of makes you think about what Proverbs chapter 29 and verse 10. It's the bloodthirsty that hate the upright. And, you know, and you can kind of see that being played out throughout the history of man. You know, it goes against righteousness exalting a nation, and when right is trying to be instilled, what do those that are unrighteous do? They lash out. They become very violent. And this is borne out in the Bible over and over again. Men that fret and rage at God's counsel are impiously aiming to defeat them, but they imagine a vain thing. It's a vain thing for man to imagine that he can fight against God and win. Now, also another thought is, you know, God overruled these works of these men, didn't he? He overruled these works of his men to serve his own purpose, making Joseph an instrument to save much people alive. Joseph here is a type of Christ. Though he was the beloved son of his father, he was hated by the wicked world. And so we find the same setting with Jesus Christ. Brother Con, you have anything you want to add to that?
No, you covered it well.
Covered it well. Eric, you got some comments you want to make on it? Okay. Jeff,
I
you...
was just going to bring up Levi and Simeon.
Oh, okay.
Before.
Okay, yeah. And that was something I had them before that, when we was talking about Reuben said, hey, wait a minute, you know, it slipped my mind. But yeah. Jeremy, you got anything you want to add to it? Okay, all right. I'm going to stop right there and we'll get ready for our worship service. It's about a minute or two early, but I really don't want to get started in chapter 38 because we're going to shift gears here a little bit, and then we'll get back more into Joseph in the next chapter. So And I'll ring the buzzer here in about a minute or two, so.